Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Business and Travel Podcast. My name is Jackson Dean, and today we have Sharine Duran again for part 2 of this particular episode, where we discuss the story of Adzura, which is a fashion app available on the iOS and Android devices. You can find out more and have a look at the app and sign up through adzura.com. That's ADZURRA.com. And really, really interesting last episode. If you guys missed it, we went through Sharine's story of going from the corporate life, from an international relations and legal background to working in a bankruptcy finance firm to dropping everything and starting her own idea for her very first app, which just so happens to be Adzura today. So on that episode, we went through a bunch of different things of how to design an app and how to hire and outsource a development team. If you missed that episode, make sure you go back and watch that one now. It's a really, really good episode. And at the very end, we went through exactly what Sharine had raised, and that was about 250 grand. And now in this episode, we're going to go through a bit of the story behind where she's been spending that money, specifically in the sort of marketing and advertising arena. We've been doing a bit of work with Sharine at Social Growth Media on consulting and helping her with her influencers and a little bit about the launch that's coming up on July 27th. And it's going to be a huge launch party. We've got influencers from all around the world. One of the influencers is Rosanna Arkle. She's got over about 3.4 million followers now. So that's just one of the influencers coming. Huge reach there. It's going to be a massive event. We're really, really excited for it. And as always, this podcast is supported and sponsored by Social Growth Media. If you would like to find some free resources that can help you in your Instagram marketing efforts or your online marketing efforts, make sure you head over to www.socialgrowthmedia.com/resources. Pick yourself up a bunch of free stuff that's super helpful and will help you on your journey to success. But without any other further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sharine for part 2 of this episode and run us through a little bit more about the story behind Adzura. And really, really excited for this one. So let's get into it, Sharine. What have we got on the cards for today?
Thanks, Jackson. Thanks for having me here. So from last week's episode, we had that I had raised $250,000. And for everyone listening, raising that second round of funding was the turning point for my business. And not only because it was, obviously we had finance backing us up at this point, but this was basically starting off the business itself. So before, it was purely on design, beta testing to see if the market liked it. So research and development more.
Yeah.
So this was actually executing a proper business plan and making sure that you had the marketing and advertising spending that wisely, as well as making sure that design and product development was underway, which is something that you have to juggle with marketing and advertising, hiring my first hire full-time.
Yep.
So that's something, again, staff is another beast in its own, as well as making sure that you had the proper legal trademarking and contracts and making sure, learning about contracting new staff and all that legal documents that you need when you're first starting up as a startup, as well as the importance of trademarking and making sure that you're protecting your intellectual property. And then as well as the accounting beast that I had to learn, which is obviously doing your own accounts when you shouldn't be outsourcing, your accounts yet because you're not profitable or you're not really generating revenue at this point.
So all the really super fun stuff.
Yeah.
Law and accounting and numbers and staff and hiring and human resources. Yeah. All the stuff that us business owners really love dealing with on a daily basis. So on to something that's a little bit more fun, marketing and advertising. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Instagram and compare that to Facebook and maybe a few other things that you've stumbled across when it comes to testing your marketing and advertising.
Okay, so basically, I had no experience in marketing and advertising. And what's coming across in this podcast is I had no experience in business at all. And I guess with marketing and advertising, I knew from the very start of developing my app that marketing and advertising was going to be the biggest beast of all, because there's great product, there's a great idea and some good designs, but unless you can actually try and convince people to download your app or get your clientele on board to support your app, whoever it may be, there's no business there. So that all comes under marketing and advertising and branding and the importance of branding specifically. And I guess when I raised the $250,000, that was around January. Yeah. So I quit my job in February.
Yeah.
And I got at least a space, an office space, because to get this office space was actually cheaper than going to a co-working space for two people.
Cool.
Because obviously the lease space on the Gold Coast is not too expensive when it comes to commercial property.
Yeah.
And so once I received that $250,000 in funding, my first point was to hire staff to do sales, because that's how you generate revenue. And then I was focusing on marketing and advertising. And in February, we didn't really have any form of branding for Adzura yet, because I didn't know what my brand was.
Yeah.
And when I first dabbled into marketing and advertising, I bought stock photos. Yeah. That's how I branded my app. I just went onto Google and I said stock photos, and I purchased a bunch of stock photos that I thought would reflect well to my target audience.
Yeah.
So when it comes to marketing and advertising, I guess the first thing you need to know is who your target audience and what they would like. And that's how I did it. So I went on stock photos and I just purchased a lot of them and I built my website. So that was my first form of identity on the web, was my website. And I hired a web developer and I got some stock photos and I did my own copy and I asked the developer to just create this. And that was my first website, which is completely different to my website now.
Yeah.
And which was stock photos. Like, that was it. That's how I branded it first. And once I had my website up, then the second thing to do is to drive traffic to your website, to sign up, to create an emailing list.
Yeah.
And that's how that was my next step towards trying to drive traffic through Instagram, Facebook, and make sure that they convert to emails, who would then become part of my database that I could send messages to and update them about the Adzura app.
Yeah. So on the first version of the website, as I always say, version 1 is better than version none. Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to just get that version 1 website up and running?
So because we were funded at that point in time, it was probably a 1 week turnaround.
Yeah.
1 week and a half. And that's because I'm a firm believer is that when you do have funding, and that's the difference between having funding and having no funding at all, the biggest difference is that you can actually, with funding, hire people who do well in their job and outsource it to them. But when you have no funding, you have no choice but to build it yourself.
Yeah.
So when I had the funding, I knew there was no point of me learning about web development. I just outsourced it straight away, with me developing the copy as well as the images that I would like to reflect my brand. And that's what I did. That was the first thing I ever did, was to build my website, buy my URL as well as my domain name, obviously, and to look at trademarking. So before I even used Adzura as the name, I made sure that it was still available and it wasn't trademarked, as well as I knew I had to know that there was a .com for Adzura, since we're an international company and not just an Australian company.
Yeah.
And after that, when I started, obviously then you have to go create your emailing list. And that's when I reached out to you and I asked about MailChimp.
Yeah.
And no experience in creating an emailing list or a database for email marketing.
Yeah.
And you showed me how to do an emailing list. And that's, I guess, how I first contact with social growth media.
Yeah.
And with that, after I created my MailChimp account, which is free if you really, if you're obviously bootstrapping, which even though you have funding, you need to make sure that you're also still bootstrapping.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
even when we have funding now, our Dropbox expires every 9 days or like 30 days, and we just create new accounts.
Yeah, right.
And we don't pay for it at all. Or, for our MailChimp account, which is email marketing, we still don't pay for it at all. We don't care if it says MailChimp at the bottom.
Yeah.
The idea is to just get information across, especially when you're bootstrapping. Obviously, when you're generating revenue, you can invest heavily more on fancier stuff. But when you're a startup, even if you have $250,000, you should try and still find things for free.
Yeah, well, the $250,000 is going to disappear if you don't have any revenue coming in.
Exactly.
You can serve it as long as you can. So you've got the email list set up. Now, what were you doing when it came to Instagram marketing, for example?
So the first step is obviously build your socials. And anyone who is a millennial who's starting a startup or whoever is trying to build a startup now, they should always have socials. Yeah. It's so important because it is your identity on the web. In anything, really, most people look at your Instagram to prove who you are, or on Facebook. If you're a company or if you're not a company, if you're not on the internet or you're not on Instagram or Facebook, you don't really exist in most people's eyes, in consumer eyes. So what happened was I built my socials, and Instagram to grow an organic following is so hard, especially at that point. It was Instagram had major rechange for their algorithms, so that people on Instagram, you had to follow them to get notifications, to actually get notifications to the people that you want to follow. Yeah. So they were only targeting the ones that you were constantly following and some of the stories. So if you're a business owner, for example, if people aren't looking into it or engaging with your content regularly, you would disappear from their feeds.
Yeah.
And so I did that. So I built my socials, and the idea of building your socials is obviously to drive traffic to your website so that they can sign up to know more information and go to your emailing list. And that's the process.
Yeah. Or to send them to your app download page on the App Store.
So no, at that point in time, when I first started dabbling, we had no app on the App Store yet.
Cool.
So we were still building. That was still in the building process. So what we had to do was build an emailing list.
And then do like a pre-launch campaign and then a launch campaign from there.
Absolutely. So that was the next step.
Cool. All right. So to compare the results, how much more powerful have you found the time you've put into Instagram versus Facebook, for example?
Sure. So when we first started Facebook is just very expensive. That's the only thing about Facebook. And what you spend on Facebook doesn't necessarily reflect the engagement that you receive. So for example, we have 500 legitimate followers on our Facebook account.
Yeah.
And that's growing every day. And I know they're real people because most of them are friends, family, and people around that area. And they don't ever see my content, even though I post regularly, or we post 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And what we have no option because they don't see it. We have to pay for sponsored ads. And that we were budgeting around $75 a week, which is pretty small in terms of actually investing, money into Facebook. But it was our first experience into the Facebook advertisement space. Mm. And we still didn't receive any type of return on that. We would get like 3 likes.
Yeah.
And hardly any engagement. And if you really want engagement on Facebook, you need to create some form of video. It has to be video. There's just
which is also expensive.
Which is also expensive. So to create that video, there's a lot that goes in creating a video, which obviously I'll talk about creating my first campaign.
Yeah.
So with Facebook, unless you have a video, your content can disappear if you're starting now. But there's so many companies that started Facebook 7 years ago that do so well now because of how the algorithms were back then. Yeah. And that's why we focused on Instagram.
So what sort of results are you getting there?
Instagram is amazing. So what we have really seen with Instagram is, although you do have to constantly update your feed and post 3 times a day, which is how many times we post a day, or we try to, it's so good when it comes to making sure that your target audience that follow you is up to date. Your stories, I think stories are more effective than posts. So stories, we have 300-400 people sometimes looking into our stories. Yeah. And that's just our stories, and we can spam the hell out of them if they want to, and it's still okay kind of to do that. And your post is great too, because people liking, commenting, and make sure that you comment back, because that will drive more traffic to your Instagram as well. Yeah. As well as make sure that if anything, if you don't, initially when we started, we were driving people to our website. We wanted to drive people to our Instagram instead, because our website's great, but it's the same website that you see all the time. Whereas like Instagram is always so diverse and there's always some new information to know about. That's more important than having just a website there with the same static information. To have a Instagram profile that's always diverse and new, with up-to-date new information, when your launch is coming, what people should do to sign up for your emailing list, things like that. And that URL line that you can have on Instagram, that should always be updated to reflect what you need in that specific moment. Yeah, so if anyone is listening, what's your Instagram handle? It's adzura_app. So ADZURRA_APP. Cool. And so on there, you've built that to up to about, 1,000 followers now? And, you're getting over 100 likes on quite a few photos, which is like 10% engagement. How much money would you have to spend on Facebook ads to try and get the same amount of likes with the same type of audience that you have on Facebook? It depends. So on Facebook, if you want to spend a lot of money, you wouldn't have to spend too much, but you wouldn't have the quality of followers. That's the thing. So on Facebook, what we tend to see is some people will like our content when we spend money on sponsored ads, but it's people from India or from Russia or from people around the world who aren't exactly your target audience, because you don't know their background story or their background interests. Whereas on Instagram, you can keep a close eye on your target audience. You can build it to be extremely niche, which is what we started doing, to be just Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, or you can make it big. But my high recommendation is just to have a solid organic following of, for example, girls from the Gold Coast and Brisbane following your content, and it'll just expand organically from there. I wouldn't know what the cost specifically, but I would know anything more than free is more than free. Exactly. So unless they're organic and you can engage people for free, I don't really care about the cost. The free is what we're looking for. Which is why so many people are just primarily doing all their marketing and advertising on Instagram nowadays. But on the topic of marketing and advertising and videos, let's have a chat a little bit about your campaign that you put together. Pretty impressive. And if you guys want to have a look at it, there are promo videos on the front page of the Adzura website. But tell us a bit about the process and struggles of organising a video campaign of that sort of magnitude. Yeah, absolutely. I know that you know exactly how it went down because you were there. Yeah, right. However, it's actually a complete struggle doing your first campaign because, as I've said and mentioned before, I had a legal and international relations background. And then now I was going into tech, but I didn't really think about the fashion aspect of my business. Even though I was catering for the fashion industry because we connect brands to users as quickly as possible, I didn't really think that I was in fashion. I was like, I'm in startup, I'm in technology because I'm an app, obviously. So I'm a tech startup. And then one day I sat down, I think I pitched it to one of the brands that we had, who's a fashion brand, which is a great fashion brand, Swimwear Line. And they said, they looked at our website and they're like, you know that although you're an app, you are catering to the fashion world. Yeah. And I said, yeah, of course. Like, we have brands and, you know, they're fashion brands. She's like, then you have to be up to the standard of fashion brands. And I said, what's the standard? She's like, well, you got to create your own content. You can't just use stock photos for your own branding, because if you want high quality brands to be on your app, you have to have high quality content to show that you are up to the standard of their level. Yeah. And that was basically a slap in my face to go, oh, I can't just think about design or the app, and which is something that most founders do because they want to get the product right. And, you know, as Elon Musk says all the time, is that focus on your product, like create the best product and people will download it or purchase it if it's a great product. But when you're an app as well, you create a great product, but it doesn't matter if your branding of that product isn't something that most people want to invest in. Right. So that's when I started my first campaign, which was an extreme struggle. And
so what was your budget for the campaign?
So my budget initially was $5,000.
Right.
So I said, okay, $5,000 on my first fashion campaign.
And how much did you spend?
$10,000. I doubled that within one day.
Perfect.
And that happened because my first, this is an interesting story, is that my first experience with my campaign was horrible. Yeah. So I hired a videographer.
But what was your budget for that one?
That was only $2,000.
Right. So you're trying to sort of cut corners and do it as cheap as possible.
Absolutely.
And you got the result you probably weren't expecting but should be expecting when you have that sort of mindset to a campaign. So, yeah, tell us about that struggle.
Yeah, no. So I had $2,000 and I wanted to spend $2,000 on a campaign with no actual, no one had told me how much a campaign cost. I just thought $2,000 was sufficient enough.
Yeah.
Because it's a campaign. Like, how expensive can a campaign be?
Right.
Since we were also grabbing our products, like our fashion clothes, from the brands we already had on the app. And at that time, we already had 40 brands on the app. And so I reached out to a videographer through a business and girls group here on the Gold Coast. And that went completely wrong. So what happened was I obviously had a penthouse because we wanted to do kind of like a lifestyle campaign with the clothes that we had received from our brands.
Yep.
And I got a videographer with not really thinking about looking at her previous work. She just sounded really great. And I saw one of her pieces, which was good enough for me. Yep. And then I had a model who was a friend of mine come in. So obviously cutting corners again.
Yeah.
And then we received the products from our brands, which is cutting corners again. So, and then I just styled it because somehow I was a fashion stylist at that point. And I don't know how that even happened. So I did that and that went terribly wrong. We didn't even receive our video at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because we had problems with the videographer. She didn't want to give us the video. She didn't complete it. I don't think she had the necessary skill to create it.
Yeah.
And the model was great, my friend who did it, but we didn't have a fashion stylist to make it better.
Right.
And to make sure that the branding of my company was reflected with this video.
Yeah.
So that was $2,000 instantly gone with nothing in return.
So you sunk the $2,000 and you thought, well, instead of giving up, I'll quintuple down and spend $10,000 on the second version of that campaign. So how did you split that 10 grand? What sort of people did you hire? What sort of talent did you have to pull off what we can now see on the website?
So basically, after my experience with that videographer, I approached the PR specialist and she kind of told me she had experience in fashion. And she said that the hero of an entire campaign is a photographer.
Yep.
And that photographer needs to capture your branding, but she doesn't know what your branding is until you have 5 pieces of paper reflect, kind of like a mood board to reflect what your brand is.
Yeah.
So I had to do some research. So before, with my $2,000, I didn't do any research on my branding. I didn't even think about what my brand is. I just thought if I got people together, that they would execute the branding for me.
Yeah.
This time I knew I had to do a bit of research in terms of what my branding was. And that's when I chose the top 5 e-commerce stores that I would like to see on my app.
Right.
And basically because they're famous and people like them and they've done really well for the last 5-6 years. So I chose them and I looked at their branding and I said, what's the best parts of branding from those 5 e-commerce stores? And I created 5 pages of mood boards, 1 mood board from each e-commerce store. And I created that and I got a photographer that was extremely well known to execute good campaigns. She was triple the amount of a videographer that I paid for, but she was completely worth it. And for anyone listening there, the photographer is the hero of the campaign. They are the ones that capture the moments of your brand. And once I got that photographer, I knew who my photographer was because of the previous work she did. The moment I chose her, I gave her my mood board. She said, that's fine, I can do this because every single one of these photos is a location here on the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And that's when I chose my location. So I spent my money on a photographer at that point. So I knew I had to pay her, the location.
Yeah.
So I had chosen my location. So I knew the background, the scenery. And that's when I had to choose the videographer.
Yeah.
And I came across another campaign video that the photographer had worked with the videographer. And once you choose one person, it's a small community of well-renowned creative artists in that industry. They'll normally recommend someone. And once I saw that campaign that they did together in the US, I knew I just chose him. He was just that good.
And do you find that you would have more confidence in hiring someone that, you know, even though they're more expensive, they've got a bit more of their own personal brand and their own personal name to uphold, so you know that they're going to actually deliver the product and you know you're actually going to get something back because they have a lot more on the line. Whereas when you hire these freelancers or people that are unknown, like they don't, you know, seem to have this sense of responsibility that they actually have to deliver a quality product at a quality time. And I feel like, yeah, going through this whole experience and working with your brand, I feel like when you have got that personal brand that you're working with, they're just so much more accountable. They take their work so much more seriously, and it costs maybe double, maybe triple, but at least you know it's guaranteed.
Absolutely. When the photographer is well renowned to work with high quality fashion brands or fashion houses, because they're well known in that industry, they don't want to be known for flunking a project or not executing a project.
Yep.
And so that's why they have this utmost responsibility, because of the fact that they deliver high quality projects and they're not about to stop that type of image and reputation. So they have that reputation to uphold. And that's how you choose your freelancers. Like, it's hard to have it in-house when you're a startup. So you have to choose freelancers. You have no choice. It's too expensive to have it in-house unless you have raised, millions of dollars.
Yeah.
But the idea is choosing the right freelancers, and the freelancers that have years of experience, and no matter what their cost is, trust me, you just want to pay that cost to prevent what's going to happen to another freelancer, which is probably not even receiving your own product.
Exactly.
So once I chose my photographer, location, and my videographer, that's when I chose the models. And we have a lot of problems with choosing our models, but once you choose the images or the models that you want to represent your brand, that's when you get your fashion stylist.
Yeah.
And your fashion stylist is probably one of the most unknown puzzle pieces that is required in a campaign and is a necessity, but most people kind of skimp on that for branding. However, you should really invest in a fashion stylist, because without a fashion stylist, your branding can seem out of place.
Yeah. And, well, you got the result that you wanted and it all went according to plan there. Tell us a little bit about dealing with Instagram influencers over the past few months.
So working with your campaign and, working for people that you're paying to execute something, was extremely difficult, and like another turning point in my business, especially with the amount of information I had to receive and know about campaigns. But then hiring Instagram influencers who are not just freelancers, but also big travel enthusiasts who they're never really in the country, or are models part-time, so they have other jobs that take them away from the job that you want them to do, or just this new Instagram environment where, you know, they have such high followings that they take for granted the brands that they want to work with or the companies they work with. So that was Instagram influencers, honestly, are so hard to work with.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. Every brand, it's kind of something that most people don't want to talk about because it's such a necessity.
Yeah.
But it is so hard to work with them, and that's coming from a startup. There's a lot of Instagram influencers, don't get me wrong, that work well, and you just work with them and collaborate on how much payment and what they can do for you.
The minority,
but majority of them are extremely difficult to work with. And my advice is that just try and make sure that you have a contract in place that guarantees you a result, even though sometimes those contracts don't uphold.
Yeah.
But
so, for example, you had a budget of that you wanted to work with and get a bunch of influencers to come to your launch, and from there we're going to get this app and the message behind it and the product and everything out there to the world through these influencers. But how much could a business owner honestly expect to pay for one influencer or multiple influencers in a campaign like what you're pulling off at the moment?
So for my campaign was obviously my first campaign was all to come to this point, which is the launch of my company.
Yeah.
So after my launch, that's another story, what's going to happen. So all of these last 6 months was to get a campaign, so fashion shoot and things like that, all sorted out to brand my company, and then hire the 5 influencers to show this campaign to the world. And I spent for 25 influencers, majoring from, you know, Rosanna Arkle, which has 4 million followers, to a few who are like 500,000 to 800,000 followers, to micro influencers with 10,000 followers. Initially I had a $15,000 budget.
Right.
For influencers.
Right.
I scaled that down to 10,000 to ultimately 8,000 because I just had to go with micro influencers than macro influencers. I had no choice. It was too difficult to work with macro influencers. And honestly, micro influencers had a greater return on investment than the macro influencers.
And you feel like that's because Instagram is almost intentionally penalizing macro influencers' engagement nowadays, and they're actually not showing, even though they might have, say, millions of followers, there's still only 100,000 or so people on their Instagram that are even seeing that message. So you're paying this price for someone who theoretically has millions of followers, but it's only getting seen by a much smaller majority of that audience, yet you still have to pay the high price. Whereas with a micro influencer, most of their audience is seeing their message, but you're only paying the price for that particular audience, and you know exactly how big that audience is.
Yeah, sure. That is basically how I feel about Instagram. In terms of macro influencers, you know, they can be from $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 a post, and maybe like an event to attend to, which is what my event was, and what my event is. Yeah. Sorry. They can be that much money.
Well, they can be 10, 15, 20, 30 grand.
Or even sometimes like that. Yeah. But what we find is that most of the people are random strangers and from different parts of the world, which is great if you have money to throw to macro influencers around the world and you just want branding around the world. But for a startup, you need to hit specific users to your targeted audience. Yep. So you need to hit the average girl down the road that might download your app. And that's how you reach them, is through micro influencers, because it's the micro influencer's friend of a friend that you want to reach. It's not the girl who's got 4 million followers who might have a friend in London, but we don't actually know that that's a real person, or it's just a creepy old guy that likes to like follow hot girls on Instagram, and those are not our target users.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I think Instagram is penalizing those high micro influencers, because they don't they reach what we find just complete strangers, weird, creepy guys that just say, oh, you look hot. And then you do get the minority where it's like the big influencers approaching the big influencers, following those macro influencers. But then again with that is that if they're reaching macro influencers, so if your macro influencer is reaching another macro influencer, it's harder for that macro influencer to download your app because they are so busy anyways.
Yeah.
They have a high reputation and they don't just download an app for the sake of downloading an app. Whereas if you hit the girl down the road, you're probably going to have a high conversion rate of trying to download your app than the macro influencer in London somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's all awesome. And I guess the message here is you have to spend money to make money. And you've spent and invested quite a lot into this launch. And we certainly wish you the best of luck with this coming up on July 27th. Make sure you go and grab the app, guys. If you haven't already, type it in at Xero.com and you'll be able to find all the information to download it from there. But before we end this episode, let's talk a little bit about what's next and what is ahead. So you've got the launch coming up in about a week. And then where are you off to straight after the launch?
So 2 weeks ago, obviously we've been preparing for this launch, and it's a major part of our turning point in our business because we look at the data that we receive from the launch and our interest, and then we see where the business goes after that. And that's the thing about startups. You can't plan 3 years in advance of where you go.
Yeah.
You have to plan every 3 months. I rebudget my budgeting spreadsheet every day.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, figuring out what happens after the launch, I didn't really know. I was a bit lost actually. And 2 weeks ago, I received an email from the Australian landing pad, which I had applied for back in, I think, January. So it's completely skipped my mind. I just applied for it because we're a startup and we had raised the threshold of what they required a startup to raise. And then we got accepted to this Australian landing pad in Tel Aviv, Israel. So straight after launch, I'll be heading to Silicon Valley for a month in August to experience the Silicon Valley world of startups and technology and go to conferences as well as seminars and visit the headquarters of the top tech companies in the world. Then after a month of doing that, in September 1, I start my landing pad program for 3 months in Tel Aviv with the Australian government.
Awesome. How excited are you?
I'm extremely excited because when you start a startup as the founder and CEO, you do have to focus on a lot of things like what I said before, product development, as well as marketing, advertising, things like that, your legals and financials. But this time I get to actually focus on improving user experience in my app, improving the technology on my app, knowing how to optimize my app onto the App Store, seeking SEO specialists, and just great coders around the world to know how I can improve the technology so it can be bigger and better for our next version.
And you get to travel the world while you do it.
Absolutely. So that's the perk of working in a startup, is that in a tech startup, is that you can bring your work with you wherever you go. So I'll be visiting Tel Aviv, I'll be visiting Jerusalem, Jericho, Turkey. So I'll be going to Cappadocia, which I've been so excited to go visit. Finally, I get to do it whilst I'm working, which is great.
Yep.
LA, going to Vegas for a weekend. And
sounds like a lot of work.
Great. It's going to be great. Going to Silicon Valley, which I've always wanted to visit. And then hopefully maybe a stint in Egypt whilst I'm over in the Middle East. But that's the thing about a startup, I guess, is that you get to travel. But not to anyone listening there, it took me 1.5 years of working my ass off to get to this point.
Yeah, so you deserve it.
Well, there's still so much to go with my startup, but it is a turning point. Leaving my hometown and everything like that, it's pretty difficult, but it'll be great to actually focus on the app side of things instead of things that can kind of take your attention away, which is your marketing, your advertising, your branding. That's all sorted now. So now I get to improve the user experience for all the users out there who want to download Xero.
Well, it's really, really exciting times ahead. Well, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today, Sharine. It's been a pleasure, and I hope for anyone that's still listening that you got a lot out of this, lots of little gold nuggets of information in there if you were paying close attention. Make sure you execute on any of that advice if you found it helpful. Remember that version 1 is better than version none. So if you have an idea or you have something that you need to get done, put out a version 1 first. Make sure from there you put out your version 2, and eventually it'll look like the version 10 that you've got in your head. But for this particular episode, as always, we would like to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, leave us a comment on the page below. You can, wherever you're listening to this, there'll be a place where you can give us some feedback. You can also hit up myself on Instagram at JacksonDean1. You can hit up Sharine on adzura.com, or you can go on Instagram at adzura_app. And we really, really do appreciate these 2 episodes from Sharine. Lots and lots of information. And if you guys need any more help or information about this podcast, follow-up tips, any resources and guides, head on over to socialgrowthmedia.com/resources. Plenty of helpful stuff there to keep you on your continued journey of success. Thanks, guys, for listening, and we will catch you next week in the next episode of the Business and Travel Podcast.